Okay, thank you everybody for joining us. And first of all, a happy Hanukkah. As we say in Yiddish, I heard some people are taking Yiddish classes here. A Freilichen Hanukkah, right? Freilichen means happy, joyous. So a Freilichen Hanukkah, really, it's I'm so happy to be able to do a lunch and learn on Hanukkah. We try really hard to do it. And I just want to throw in a little tidbit. We're going to talk about this during the class, but I think it's something very important to remember that Hanukkah is a very joyous time. Hanukkah is a time that we get together with family, but Hanukkah also is a time that we're celebrating, as we're going to see in the lunch and learn in a couple of minutes, we're celebrating the ability to be able to learn Torah. Right? We're celebrating the ability to be able to practice our Judaism. What better way to celebrate this excitement and this joyous and this miracle of being able to learn Torah and to practice our Judaism than actually having a class and learning Torah. So I always love doing lunch and learns on Hanukkah just for that reason alone, to be able to actually celebrate the holiday in its unbelievable and in its really unique way. And we're going to talk more about this idea in a couple of minutes in the lunch and learn. But before we start, I want to thank our sponsor, today's sponsor, Jim and Dina Richmond, and sponsoring in honor of their children and their grandchildren. And I want to wish a big happy birthday to Jim Richmond. It was his birthday yesterday. He turned 50. Right, Jim? It was, I think, more like 45. No, the last, no. Right, 65, but not for the record. But no, really, happy birthday, Jim. You should have many more years of happiness and health, and you should have many more years of nachas, Jewish enjoyment from your children and your grandchildren. And again, thank you for sponsoring. And of course, a big thank you to our co-hosts of the Lunch and Learn. COVID has put us and the JCA together as a unit of one, of hosting these lunch and learns together. They have the space, and it's Chaim. So coming together, it's really awesome that we could do these joint programs together. And a big thank you for the JCA. It's always a great to be able to partner with our partnering organizations here in town. So thank you, Rachel, for organizing this and the JCA. Okay, with all those introductions, let's get cracking. So we've talked about this question in the past, and I want to see if anybody remembers any of the answers. We're going to take a little different direction today. And the question's like this. Hanukkah is 8 days, correct? That's not a trick question. It's 8 days, right? Now, what's the storyline? The story is, there was oil on that for 1 day. And the miracle happened that it lit for 8 days. So therefore, we celebrate 8 days of Hanukkah. Now, any second grader knows that if there's enough oil for 1 day, so that means to say, how long was the miracle for? Hello? 7 days. So we should have a holiday of 7 days, not 8 days. Right? Because the miracle was really only 7 days, not 8 days. So this question has been asked by many great rabbis. Rav Yosef Cairo, the author of the Code of Jewish Law, he asked this question. After doing some research, I found some medieval commentaries dating all the way back to the 1200s. Some great rabbis from that generation have asked this question too. And it's a question that has been asked by many, many, many different rabbis. Why is the holiday 8 days? It should really be only 7 days, because the miracle was really only 7 days. So actually, there's a book, as we call it in Judaism, a sefer, right? A Jewish book that has over 100 answers to this question. Don't worry about it. We're not going to go through all 100, right? But there's over 100 answers to this question. And I want to take a certain direction of how to answer this question. Now, as we're good Jews, we're going to answer a question with another question. And I want to tell you a very fascinating halakha, a very fascinating piece of Jewish law. And it goes like this. If the Talmud tells us in Tractate Shabbat, when it talks about the laws of Hanukkah, Jim, if I could just ask you to move over a little bit, I can't see stuff, and I really want to see stuff. There you go. Thank you. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, he's cute. I like seeing the people that I'm talking to. Thank you, Jim. So the Talmud says in Tractate Shabbat, where it talks about the laws of Hanukkah, and the Talmud says like this, that if one is walking in the marketplace and he sees the light of the Hanukkah candles, he has to make a blessing. He has to make a blessing. Now, the Talmud said you can't make all of the blessings. You can't make the blessing of lighting the candles because you're not lighting the candles. But you can make the other blessings of the blessing of Shas and Nisim Lavasenu, that God has created miracles for our forefathers, and even today. And if it's the first night of Hanukkah, then you could also say Shehechianu, right? The blessing of when a new cycle of the holiday of the mitzvah comes about. We always say Shehechianu. You can make Shehechianu. Now, there's a whole discussion in the Talmud and in the commentaries. I'm not going to go through the whole topic. I spoke about it actually in Eitz Chaim between Mincha and Ma'ariv on Shabbat. Right? But there's a whole discussion. Is it if you're not going to light later? If you haven't lit yet? There's a whole discussion. When does this law apply? Let's just say for all the opinions hold, that if you know you're not going to go ahead and light Hanukkah, you're not going to have an opportunity because you're traveling on the road and you're not going to be able to light Hanukkah candles. Right? You haven't lit Hanukkah candles yet, and you see Hanukkah candles lit, then all the opinions hold. You make those two blessings on the first day, and the second day you make the first blessing. And the commentaries ask, guys, think about this for a minute. Where else do we have a mitzvah like this? If you see someone shaking the lulav and esrog, and you're not going to be able to shake the lulav and esrog on Sukkot. If you see someone blowing the shofar, you can't hear it, right? Because you're behind a plexiglass, because now everything's through glass, right? And you can't hear it, right? And you're not going to be able to blow the shofar later. You make a blessing just because you see someone blowing the shofar. You see someone eating matzah on Pesach, and you're not going to be able to, for some reason, you can't eat matzah. You're allergic to matzah, right? Or for whatever reason, you're not going to have the opportunity to eat matzah, and you're walking by someone's house and you see them eating the matzah and the maror. Do you make a blessing? No. You see someone giving charity. You see someone, whatever other mitzvah that we say blessings upon. If you see someone doing a mitzvah, do you make a blessing by seeing someone doing a mitzvah? The answer is no. So the commentaries want to know why, by Hanukkah, if you see someone lighting the menorah, haroeh madlik, that's the language of the Talmud. Haroeh is someone that sees the Hanukkah candles being lit. Madlik, he makes a blessing. Why is that? So strange. What's the reason behind that? So to answer this question, we have to understand Hanukkah a little better. We have to understand what this holiday is really all about. As the introduction that I gave, right, that Hanukkah is a holiday that's more than just celebrating our survival physically, right? Hanukkah is a holiday of spirituality, but we have to understand what that means. Let's take a little deeper look at what that means. So if you look at the second source, right, on page 1, it says like this, and I'm just gonna speak about it outside. What were the Greeks, right? Who are the Yavanim in Hebrew? The Greeks who lived at the time, and the Greeks were the ones that persecuted the Jewish people. Now, just a quick history lesson, right, for those that are not aware. At the time, the Greek Empire split, right, into 3. Right, there was the Syrian Greeks, the Egyptian Greeks, and then there were Greeks that actually lived in Greece. Right, this is talking about the Syrian Greeks. The Syrian Greeks invaded Israel, the land of Israel, which actually was under control of the Egyptian Greeks, right? Were under control, and they invaded, and they brought upon the Jewish people their culture, and they forced the Jewish people to live their culture. The Greeks' philosophy was, right, they were fixated on intellect. They're fixated on knowledge, which is very important. But the difference is, they're fixated on nature where human choice plays no role. The intellectual fiction made it impossible for the Greeks to comprehend, right, or appreciate Jewish Torah. Because the Jewish Torah values, right, is rooted in the concept of spirituality world where God created for humans to make a choice. What is one of the fundamental ideas of Judaism? Bechira chavsi, free choice. You all have free choice what to do. You all have free choice to come to the class or to join us on Zoom or on Facebook Live or to do something else. You all have free choice to light the Hanukkah candles or not. Free choice is a fundamental idea in Judaism. The Greeks, on the contrary, right? The Greeks believe in nothing called spirituality. And therefore, they believe that everything was predestined. It all has to do with the zodiacs. It all has to do with the alignment of the stars. It all has to do with the idea of the physical world really controlling. We're just sort of living through life. We have to find the intellect. We have to find whatever happens to us. We have to try to utilize that for the best. But that was a Greek philosophy. What does this mean? Meaning to say that the Greeks, right, were a nation that worshipped the physical world and primarily the physical body. The whole idea of the Olympics was created by the Greeks, right? The whole idea of the Olympics, of seeing how fast you run or how high you jump, or, right? Okay, very nice. So you know how to run so fast. Good for you, right? A deer runs a lot faster than you, right? And how high you jump. A kangaroo can jump higher than you, right? Now, I'm not saying that there's nothing to it, but that's really all stuff that you're born with. Right? So I can run fast, right? Does that make me a better or worse person? No. Why does it make someone a better person because they can run fast? Okay, say they worked hard and they trained and good for them, but they still have to have, with all that training, they still have to have an ability in their structure of their body to be able to run fast. And that's predetermined. That's nothing to do with them. What they do with that ability, if they train, right? And then there's competitions of people that all have that, how much they train and how much not. So the concept of the Greek philosophy was, as we said, nothing that's really in your control. They worshipped the concept of the physical world. On the contrary, the Torah, what we aspire to, we know that there's certain things that are beyond our control. How fast we run, right? How tall we are, right? How healthy we are to a certain degree. It's up to us if we take care of our body, but there's certain things that are just beyond our control. But that's not what we worship. That's not what we idolize. That's not what we think is important. What is important in Judaism? Important in Judaism is our ability to transform ourselves into something more spiritual. Our ability to be able to make a choice of things that are in our control. Should I have that cheeseburger or not? Should I wear a kippah when I go into synagogue or not? Should I go to synagogue? So every person on their own level, wherever they're holding, taking that next rung up, every one of us have a choice. We all have a choice. That's in our control. Coming to the class today, as I mentioned. That is something that we are in control of. So the whole idea, just to put into perspective for a second, the Greeks, when they came into the land of Israel and they saw the Jewish culture, it clashed with their philosophy. It clashed with their whole mindset, with their whole upbringing. That they're not in control. If you're born fast, then you have to train. It's in your control to train or not to train, but the philosophy of what they worship, someone's born into a certain class, someone's born with a certain talent, they can make it in life. Someone else, they can't. Where in Judaism, it's totally the opposite. What we idolize, what we show respect for, is not so much how fast you run or how tall you are or how good looking you are. It's, were you able to overcome your challenge that God gave you? Were you able to hold yourself back or refrain from saying negative things about other people? Were you able to give charity even though you feel a little bit like, oh, it's my money, I don't want to give it? Or whatever it is, whatever challenges you have, positive or negative, that's in our control. So there was a complete clash in between. So now we understand why the Greeks came out and started persecuting the Jewish people, and they made all these decrees against the Jewish people. And they made all these decrees against the Jewish people because they were trying to uproot this culture. And I spoke about this morning a little bit, some of the decrees that the Jewish people in my morning minute, right? One of the three main decrees were Shabbat, Brit Milah, and Rosh Chodesh, right? Keeping the Sabbath, having circumcision, and Rosh Chodesh. And we spoke about what these things represent. Shabbat, the idea of not working on a certain day, the idea of not doing something physical, creation on a certain day that beyond the scope of their comprehension. Connect to something more spiritual. A Brit Milah, mutilating a physical body. They worshiped the body. They looked at it as it's being mutilated. We understand that we're recognizing a Brit Milah saying that we're not perfect. Same way we need to fix our physical body, we have to fix our soul, our neshama. And this morning we spoke about Rosh Chodesh, the idea of Rosh Chodesh of renewal and the ability to change and the ability that things are not always constant the way they are. We have the ability to change things. So we have a better understanding why they made these decrees. We have a better understanding why they need to uproot from the Jewish people their spirituality. And the commentaries say that this is the first time in history, the first time in Jewish history that there was a spiritual persecution only. We had persecutions. We had Purim. Haman wanted to kill us. But he didn't care if we were Jewish or if we practiced Judaism or not. He wanted to kill us. Right? We had fights and wars with other nations. Right? It's in Tanakh and the prophets speaks about it. But it wasn't necessarily if they kept or they didn't keep, they didn't care. Either they wanted land or they wanted to kill the Jewish people. But this is the first time in Jewish history that there's a spiritual persecution. First time in Jewish history there's a spiritual persecution because the philosophy of the Greeks clashed with the Jewish philosophy. And they were enlightened people. They didn't want to just kill the Jewish people. They wanted to bring them into the fold. So it's important to get a little background of why they persecuted the Jewish people. What was this persecution supposed to accomplish before we even take a step further on understanding Hanukkah? This is the background of why the Greeks even started. It's mind-boggling to think that the first time the Jewish people had spiritual persecution was not until the middle of the Second Temple. Right? Just think about it. The Jewish people were around for almost 1,000 years, right? Since the giving of the Torah. They were 400 years before King David. And then the first temple was around for 400 years. And then the Hanukkah story happened about 200 years into the Second Temple. It's almost 1,000 years, right? Since the giving of the Torah on Mount Sinai, there wasn't a spiritual persecution. So the Greeks are the first one. And it's important to put things into context. So now, how do we fight a spiritual persecution? How do we fight a spiritual persecution? So one would say, you know how you fight a spiritual persecution? You go ahead and you pray more. You go ahead and do more learning Torah. And that's true. But at the same time, you're putting your life on the line. All right, so we're all familiar with the story. Why do we play dreidel? Everybody's familiar with the story of why we play dreidel? How we play dreidel? Because the Jewish people wanted to continue learning Torah. And they went out to hide in caves. And when they had the spotter, right, they're not an alarm system, right? They had a spotter, and when they saw a Greek patrol coming, they hid all the Torah scrolls, and they pulled out something like a dreidel. I don't know if it's exactly like a dreidel. And that definitely did not have the letters of the dreidel, because the letters of the dreidel spell out Nes Gadol Haya Sham, right? Here in America. In Israel, we say Po, right? With a Pei, right? Because a miracle happened here. So they didn't have those letters because no miracle happened yet, right? But they played with like a top, something like a dreidel, that the Greeks shouldn't think that they're learning Torah. So yes, they did do that. But how do you truly fight a spiritual persecution? So it says Rav Dessler, right, that throughout the, if you look at the next source, the Jewish people rose to the level of being purely selfless in their commitment. And this was the essential spiritual reason that they were merited to overcome the Greeks. What does that mean? So if you notice, right, there's a lot of difference between Hanukkah and Purim. I don't want to get into, we did lunch and learns on the difference between Hanukkah and Purim in the past. I don't want to get too much into that. And we did a difference between the Gregor and the dreidel and the morning minute at the beginning of the week. But there's a lot of differences. One of the big differences between Hanukkah and Purim is what the Jewish people did that the Torah, or that the rabbis emphasized to go ahead and fight the decree. As you mentioned, Purim was a physical decree. It was like Hitler, may his memory be bolted out forever and ever. The Holocaust. It didn't make a difference how religious you are, how religious you're not, wipe them out. Hanukkah was more like the Inquisition, right? Where if you converted, good. If not, burn to the stake. And so we see we've had throughout history these two different kind of persecutions. What are we told about and emphasized about when they fought by Purim? Yes, they went out to war. But what do we emphasize on? The fasting, the praying. Esther, right? Queen Esther told Mordechai to tell the Jewish people to fast for 3 days before she goes and besieges King Ahasuerus. Right? It speaks about the fasting and the prayers and the camaraderie of the Jewish people coming together, uniting, coming together, united together. What do we see by the Hanukkah story? There's a prayer that we say in the Amidah, and when we do Birchat HaMazon, called Al Anisim. Right? Al Anisim, we know the song, Al Anisim, Al Purkan, right, on the miracles, but then there's a paragraph that we insert for Hanukkah, and a paragraph that we insert for Purim. Now, the one for Hanukkah is much longer, and we have to say it for more days. It's much longer, but the majority of the paragraph speaks about the war. The majority of the paragraph, and I encourage everyone to go ahead and look it up. Right? It's in the Siddur, right, in the Amidah, right after the Modim. And the majority of the paragraph speaks about the war. That there was the few in the hands of the many, the righteous, the unrighteous in the hands of the righteous, and the impure in the hands of the pure. And then afterwards it says, oh, and after they won the war, they went into the temple and they lit candles and they created the miracle, the holiday of Hanukkah. It doesn't even say anything about that that the candles lit for 8 days. It doesn't say anything about that. This says they lit candles, and they established the 8 days of Hanukkah. The majority of the paragraph speaks about the war. So we see the emphasis of the war is important. Why is the emphasis of the war important? Judaism, we're not into war. Yes, we have an IDF now because we have for protection. Right? And we have to arm ourselves and protect ourselves. But we're not warrior Mongols, right, that try to conquer everybody. It's not what we're going to go ahead and praise. Oh, look, they won the war. So why do we emphasize on the war so much? Excuse me. Says Rav Dessler, that's the depth of what Rav Dessler is saying, that what the Jewish people did to be able to show that they were committed and that we're fighting the spiritual persecution, the only way to fight spiritual persecution is by showing God, and more importantly, showing yourself and your children and your grandchildren and your great-grandchildren and your community that spirituality is more important to you than your physical life. Because you believe that there's something beyond this physical world. We believe that we have an neshama, a soul that's internal. We believe that we're fighting for something that's everlasting. We believe that we're fighting for something that we're connecting with our forefathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, Rebecca, Sarah, Rachel, Leah, Esther, and many other Jewish people throughout history, our Bubbas and Zaydas, our grandparents. That's internal. That's spirituality. And how do we show that? By willing to put our physical lives on the line. Be willing to do that for our spiritual lives. And the commentaries say, where do we get this energy to be able to do this? We get this energy from the ability to sacrifice ourselves for something spiritual from the Torah. From the essence of realizing that spirituality, our neshama, transcends physical reality. And therefore, we go ahead and we emphasize that the Jewish people won the war. They went ahead and they fought the war. They were willing to put their physical lives on the line. As Avdessa writes, right? They were selfless in their commitment to their spirituality. Of course, they think they won. They think they knew they were going to win, but they had to show the Jewish people, it was a small group, because it's a true righteous and the highest level, being able to do that. They had to show the rest of the Jewish people not to give up, to keep on hiding in the caves and learn Torah. All those people, all those people that were hiding in the caves and learning Torah, all those people that were hiding in the caves and keeping Shabbat and doing the Brit Milah, they had to give them the strength to continue to do what they're doing. They didn't know they were going to win the war. They said, no, look, we're willing to put our lives in the line and try to fight the Greeks to get rid of this decree. And therefore, God made a miracle and said, you're willing to put your physical life on the line? I'm going to let you win the war. And they won the war. It was miraculous. It was unbelievable. So that leads us to the next question. So then, why don't we celebrate that? Let's make a big parade. Right? A big military parade. Let's obligate ourselves to have a Seudah, a meal. On Purim, we're supposed to have a Seudah, a meal. Right? Generally, when we do a Seudah, a meal, it's to celebrate something. Hanukkah, we have no obligation. It's customary for families to get together and have a Hanukkah party. But there's no mitzvah, there's no obligation to have a meal, like on Pesach or Sukkot or Purim. So we don't do anything to celebrate. Yes, we say it in the Ala Nisan, in the prayer, in the paragraph that we insert for Hanukkah. But otherwise, there's no mention of the war. So if, as Avdessa was saying, that we see that the winning of the war, right, was such an essential part of the Jewish people showing how to fight the spiritual persecution. So why don't we do anything to overcome? Why don't we do anything to celebrate it? And the answer is, my friends, and if you turn the page, and the second source of the page, they're a little out of order, right? The answer is, my friends, because over time, a war, as we know very well, could be played out very differently. Imagine, right, a couple years later, even maybe the next year, or down the line, we're now 2,500 years later. Right? You want to know what really happened? I'll tell you. Matisyahu and his children, they were geniuses in war. They knew about how to attack in a small, infantry attacks, and they attacked different key positions. And over time, they crippled this mighty Greek army. It was really all their intellect. It's really all their a great tactic of war. Now, when you start spinning the story that way, do you see any miracle there? Do you see anything about that it was a miraculous war? No. So therefore, says the commentaries, that God wanted the Jewish people to realize of the essence of what the war really represented. That the war represented the Jewish people putting their lives on the line. There were no great generals. There were kahana and priests who served in the temple, and rabbis, right? Nothing against rabbis, right? But I don't think, typically, right, rabbis are the best, in warfare, right? Even though, I have a good score in my risk game and on my phone, right? But typically, they're not, the most geniuses in warfare. But God wanted this to stay like this throughout history. So you know what he did? He created a new miracle. He created the miracle of the oil. The miracle of the oil was really unnecessary. Because in Jewish law, if God forbid someone doesn't have an arm, he doesn't have to put on tefillin, phylacteries. If someone doesn't have something, God's not going to say, oh, why didn't you do that mitzvah? Right? Why didn't you do that commandment? So if the Jewish people didn't have any oil that was pure, they came into the temple. The Greeks made chaos in the temple. They impured all the oil. Right? Again, just back to their philosophy. What did they cure? Didn't say they poured out all the oil. Didn't say they couldn't find any oil. Said they couldn't find any oil with the seal of the Kohen Gadol, the highest priest. That meant that it was pure. The Greeks made all the oil impure by touching it and putting it in ways that it will be for idol worshiping, not usable for something that's totally pure. Why did they do that? Why didn't they just pour it all out? Back to the Greeks' philosophy, because they said it can't be that a physical object has something spirituality to it. The whole concept of the temple, the whole concept of spirituality for them was foreign, and therefore they said, why should we waste good oil? I'm not going to pour it out. We're just going to break the seal, and then the Jews won't be able to use it. So that's side point. So God made this miracle. If they wouldn't have had any oil to light the Hanukkah candles, the temple candles, we call it now the Hanukkah candle, the temple candle, they wouldn't have been obligated to do it. There would have been nothing against them. Sorry, we have no oil. And let's say they had enough for one day, right? And they couldn't do it the rest. God, that's it. It's called Ones Rahmana Patri. God does not obligate you on something that you don't have the ability to do. If you have the ability to do, that's something else. It's another discussion. What's considered having the ability or not having the ability? But if you don't have the ability to do, God's not going to punish you. So why did God make this miracle? An extra miracle that was theoretically not necessary. All the other miracles we have were necessary, right? Jewish people being taken out of Egypt, they needed it. And all the 10 plagues were there to teach the Jewish people that when they're becoming a nation, that God is in control. There's lessons behind it. They're formed as a nation. That God is in control of all parts of nature. The miracle of Purim, their lives were on the line. The miracle of the war by Hanukkah, their lives were on the line. But the miracle of the oil was unnecessary. Why did God do it? And the commentaries say the reason why God did it was to teach us that the war was won because of something supernatural. Oil it's supernatural. It defies the laws of nature that a flask of oil that can last for one day can last for. It's no way of you can't make it make sense in any way in the physical world. And therefore you have to know that Hanukkah is a supernatural holiday. And therefore God wanted the Jewish people to remember that when they went out to war, when they put their lives on the line, was a supernatural thing that they did. They reached their epitome of realizing that the spirituality is really the main focus in our life. Therefore, God made this miracle of the oil. So now, my friends, I think we have an answer to our questions. We sort of gave a whole new direction, right? A whole new perspective of what the miracle of the Hanukkah candles really were there for. The miracle of the Hanukkah candles was really there for to emphasize to us that the miracle of the war was a supernatural miracle. That the purpose of Hanukkah really is to remind us that we have to remember, yes, we live in a physical world, but that's not it. What's our purpose is in this physical world is to elevate the physical world. Take oil and make it holy. Take something spiritual, take something physical and make it spiritual. Now, how do we emphasize this? Not by celebrating the war, because that could be misled over time. Oh, it was really a general, it was this, it was that. So God made the miracle of the oil, something supernatural, to say, haha, there's no questions on the oil. No way of saying that it's possible that they won, that the oil was something natural. And it gives us a whole new perspective of what the holiday of Hanukkah really is. How does this answer our question? So it answers like questions like this. Let's go backwards. The second question we asked was, why is there a commandment of seeing the candles? Why do we make a blessing if we see the candles? There's no other mitzvah if we see the mitzvah happening when we make a blessing on it. And the answer, my friends, is because Hanukkah is a holiday that one could transform himself, take himself out of the physical world. Hanukkah is a holiday when one could become all spiritual. And when he sees the Hanukkah candles, he's accomplishing of what the purpose of the Hanukkah candles were there for. The purpose of the Hanukkah candles was, as we say, Al Anisim, the blessings of Al Anisim. The purpose of the Hanukkah candles, the mitzvah of it is to remind us that this holiday is a holiday that transcends the physical reality. So when someone sees that, he's able to connect to that too. Eating matzah, right? Yes, it reminds us of that we were taken out of Egypt quickly. But the mitzvah is through eating it. The mitzvah is experiencing that yourself. You're eating this matzah, right? That was flat and this, and experiencing that eating. Shaking the lulav and esrog, it's the four species connecting to the shaking it. It's not the essence of the holiday. It's a mitzvah that's part of that holiday. But the Hanukkah candles, even when one sees the Hanukkah candles, he's connecting to the essence of the holiday. The essence of the holiday of realizing that it's a holiday that one could get out of the physical realm. You could connect to something bigger and better with spirituality. You can't make lahadlik because he's not lighting the candles. You can't do that. You have to actually light the candles to make the first blessing. But the blessing of Al Anisim, the blessing of Shechionu on the first day, one could do that because he's connecting to the energy of the day. And to make it a little more Kabbalistic, Hanukkah is the only holiday that we have that's 8 days. Right? Pesach is 7 days. Now, out of Israel, we do an extra day, right? But it's really a holiday of 7 days. Sukkot is 7 days. Then we have an extra holiday called Shmini Atzeres, the 8th day. The only other one. It's really the first day of the new holiday, but we call it Shmini Atzeres. Why? What's the number 8? We spoke about this in many lunch and learns, in many classes. 6 is 6 days of the week. It's the physical realm. 7 is Shabbat. Shabbat is combining and transforming the physical realm into something spiritual. 8 is beyond the laws of nature. As Rav Dessler says many times, Lamala min hateva. 8 represents a concept that's beyond the scope of the physical realm. Therefore, we only have a 7-day week. We only have a 7-day week, something that the physical world could comprehend. Shabbat, mixing the physical and the spiritual. But 8 is beyond that. Therefore, says the commentaries, God could have made the oil last 7 days, and the miracle could have been that they found oil quicker. They could have found a little bigger jug of oil that would last for more days. Right? Could have made the miracle many different ways. He made it specifically that there was enough oil for 1 day, and that we needed another 7 days of a miracle. That the holiday should be 8 days. We're going to answer the first question in a minute. But why 8 days? Because everything we just spoke about. Hanukkah is a holiday where we could connect to something that transcends the physical realm. We have the ability to connect to our neshama, our soul, and transcend it and to become all spiritual. I'm not talking about like these sci-fi movies where we become like the spirits. But we are able to connect to our neshama, our soul, which is something that is beyond the concept of the physical world. That's the power of Hanukkah. And that's why it's 8 days. And that's why one could even make a blessing when he sees the Hanukkah candles. So now, to answer the first question, why is it 8 days? It should be only 7. So one of the answers is it really needs to be 8 because of everything we just spoke about, right? Because we said 8's beyond the laws of nature. Okay, that's great, but the miracle is only 7 days, right? So there's many different answers, but I want to say 2 answers. One answer will connect to what we spoke about. Another answer is a cute answer, right? One of the answers is because that's what the Jewish people were able to actually find. The flask of oil was a miracle within itself. Right? The Greeks are very meticulous people. They created havoc all over the temple. All the oil was made impure. Oh, but one little flask, really? They missed one little flask that was hidden underneath the mizbeach, the altar. They created havoc all over the place. It took them weeks to clean it up. So that in and itself, say the commentaries, was a miracle. We're celebrating that miracle, so they added an extra day. That's one answer. There's many answers. The answer that I want to talk about that connects to what we're talking about today is that the rabbis added on an extra day. They did. The miracle is really only 7 days. Added on an extra. You know why they added on an extra day? They added on an extra day to celebrate the victory of the war. As we mentioned in our talk today, what we have to emphasize in Hanukkah is the victory of the war. But not in a way of victory of the war of our strength and our might, but the victory of the war of that God helped us out. There was a miracle. And therefore, we don't celebrate the war itself because that would have been able to, over time and generations, the storyline could have changed that, they're such smart generals and they had real great tactics of war. So therefore, the rabbis didn't emphasize on it. It's in our prayer. We talk about it. But the rabbis wanted to still show a thank you to God So they said, yes, the miracle of the oil only lasted 7 days, but we're going to add an extra day for the Hanukkah, which is tonight, the last day of Hanukkah, tonight and tomorrow. The 8th day, and again, no coincidence, the 8th day to commemorate the war, but the war that the Jewish people were able to reach a level of 8. As we said, 8 is transcending the physical realm. So the rabbis added on an extra day. And they said, we want to celebrate this Hanukkah menorah. The candles have to be 8 days. The holiday has to be 8 days. And we're going to add an extra day to celebrate specifically for the war, not just for the miracle of the oil. But we're going to make that day number 8. We're going to add an extra day because to remind us that the miracle of the war was something that transcended the physical realm. It wasn't a military victory. It was a spiritual victory. Because the Jewish people, as we said before, were selfless and put their physical lives on the line, as we've seen throughout history. This is something throughout history, how the Jewish people have put their physical lives on the line. Inquisitions, people were burnt in the stake. During pogroms and many, many things throughout history, they did not allow their spiritual soul to be tainted. And rather their physical body be taken away, but their soul stay pure. This is the energy of Hanukkah that we have. Now we're running out of time. I wanted to end with this last little bit that's written there. And we have a couple more minutes. I just want to point out one more beautiful point that connects to all this, and then we'll go to the last paragraph. Why is Hanukkah during this period of time of year? So you can say, well, that's when they won the war, right? Okay, but we know there's no coincidence in Judaism. There's a rhyme and reason why everything happens at a certain time. God helped the Jewish people win the war, right? And Hanukkah, the word Hanukkah means Chanu Chafhei. The Talmud says, what's the word Hanukkah? And actually, it was funny. I saw someone posted like 4 different ways of spelling Hanukkah in English, and then they had it written in Hebrew and said, this is the correct way of writing it. Right? So many different ways of trying to spell it in English. Right? But Hanukkah in Hebrew, it's Chanu, rested, Chafei, the 25th of the month. That's when Hanukkah is. Right? That's what the word Hanukkah. It also means Chanukah Sabais, that rededicating of the Temple Mount, because they cleaned it up and they rededicated. But one of the words of Hanukkah is Chanukah Chafei. They rested on the 25th. God could have made it that they won the war a month earlier. The war took a couple years. It wasn't overnight that they won the war. It took some time. So it could have made they won the war a month earlier. Could have made that they won the war 2 months later. Right? Why this period of time? So the commentaries explain, this helps out a little bit with the next thing that we're talking about, is because, as we know, different time periods represent different things. We're in a time period, at least in this side of the hemisphere, that we're in the longest nights of the year, right? It's going to start getting the day's going to start getting a little longer soon. But right now we're at a time period where it's the longest night of the year. Night represents uncertainty, represents exile, represents when we're not clear about things. That's what night represents. So therefore, God wanted to show the Jewish people that even in their most turbulent time, even in the most darkest times of their lives, spiritually and physically, but primarily spiritually, a little candle could overcome darkness. And the candle represents the neshama, the soul, as we know many times. Unfortunately, if someone has a loved one that passed away, they light a candle for commemorating of the soul, because the candle represents the neshama. So God said, I want the miracle to happen now. And how do we do this? I want the miracle of Hanukkah happening now at this period of time to teach the Jewish people another lesson through this lesson. That when we connect to our neshama, our soul, when we realize that we have the ability to transform and to change our physical reality into something spiritual, which is against the Greek philosophy, but a Jewish philosophy, that we are in control. So then we could, in the most darkest times, we could be smiling and happy. In the most darkest time, we could find salvation. We could grow and to never, ever give up, like we spoke about in our morning minute this morning. So let's just look at this last thing. Very interesting. We find many times that we light candles, right? Shabbos candles. When we light Shabbos candles on Friday, Erev Shabbat, we light 2. It's customary to light for every kid of the family, but if it's just a single person or a couple, you light 2 candles. And again, there's a custom of lighting for every person in the family, right? Yes, there's some families I know that have like 15 candles out, right? But right, by us, we have 7, right? But that's Hanukkah candles. Havdalah is another time we light Hanukkah, we light a candle. But Havdalah is one thing, but it's 2 wicks. It has to be at least 2 wicks. It can't be 1 wick. It has to be 2 wicks. 2 weeks. 2 wicks. Right? Hanukkah candle is unique. Hanukkah candle is 1 candle and 1 wick. Why? What's the difference? And not only that, right? We follow the house of Beis Hillel, the house of Hillel, right? Who tells us that every night we should add 1 candle. Right? That's to make the mitzvah more hudar, more beautiful. If one does not have more candles, he still can light 1 and fulfills his obligation. Right? But if you do have candles, it's nice to make the mitzvah more beautiful. And you add a candle every night. But when we add a candle every night, we keep them separated. Each candle by itself. Still, even though we're adding candles, we keep each one by itself. Why is that? So if you look at the last paragraph, commentators explain that Hanukkah is the guide of how to move forward from darkness. All it takes is 1 small light, 1 small good deed, 1 hello to your neighbor, 1 smile at a coworker, 1 small action, 1 small light that leads to another. And slowly every day these actions add up, filling the world with light. But to start, rather than despairing the whole world is filled with darkness, start with just 1 candle and see the world change with 1 small action at a time. As we mentioned, Hanukkah is a time that we illuminate the darkness. The darkness is in our physical life, the darkness in the world, but the darkness in our spiritual world too. And all it takes is 1 candle. We start with 1 wick. And every day we add another one. Not that they combine, but it's a new action, and then you have the whole place lit up. It's beautiful. The last night of Hanukkah, the table is beautifully lit with so many candles. It's unbelievable. That is the power of Hanukkah. That's what we're celebrating. As we said, even if you see the candles, you could connect to the energy of Hanukkah. So let's all reflect on this important lesson, this important idea of realizing that Hanukkah, yes, it's a time of joy, and to spin the dreidel, right, and to have a good time, right, and for those, even give presents. That person didn't grow up with giving presents, but yeah, if you want. But the essence of Hanukkah is really connecting to our spiritual soul, realizing to be opposite of the Greeks who thought that the physical world was all it. We're realizing, no, we are in control of our spiritual abilities to change. And through that, we could create more light in the world, make the world a much better place. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. We're going to stop the recording now.